Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Wright Flyer. As always, this is your captain, Randy Wright speaking, and I'd like to take this opportunity to personally thank you for choosing to fly over the friendly airwaves with us here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer. Now, folks, without any further ado, let's go ahead and delve into the topic I have slated for this program. Well, the Empire State of New York has, since the beginning of the Coof pandemic, been the center of attention. Whether it was back at the very early stages of the Coof, when then-Governor Andrew Cuomo had essentially sentenced New York senior citizens to an untimely death as a direct result of his policy of moving those who had been basically contracting the virus or had tested positive for it into the nursing home, as opposed to utilizing the very expensive ship, that hospital ship that was sent to New York Harbor. He basically ignored that they had that and basically wasted taxpayer money. So we now see that his mask mandates that were shot down at one point and then put in place by the new governor that came in and replaced him, Kathy Hochul, we see that their little plan there didn't work because it has now gone before the New York Supreme Court and has been shot down. Judge Thomas Raidmaker of the Nassau County, New York Supreme Court, and I'll explain how that works here in a second, shot down New York's statewide mask mandate. And in so doing, he claimed that the governor and the health inspector, the person in charge of their public health and safety, overstepped their bounds in implementing a mask mandate without first having consulted the New York legislature. Again, this is important because while it is technically within the state's plenary power to legislate for the health, safety, and morality of the people, it is still required to be enacted via the legislative process, and that's not what they did. Now, when I said that I would explain how New York's courts are, New York's different than every other state in that New York's lowest courts, or the New York trial courts, are referred to as the Supreme Court, whereas in almost every other state it is the Supreme Court. New York's equivalent to every other state's Supreme Court, or the highest court, would be referred to as, if memory serves me correctly, the Superior Court. That's just one of those weird outlying things with respect to New York. But it is interesting that we've had this development because, as I said earlier, New York, from the very get-go, had been leading the pack of states, competing, of course, with California and Michigan, with having the most draconian and oppressive mandates in effect all throughout the Coof pandemic. So to see the court stepping up is quite a development. Of course, this is following in the near immediate wake and aftermath of the Supreme Court having shot down President Biden's vaccine mandate, and also that federal district court judge here in I believe it was the Southern District for Texas, having also shot down the federal employee vaccine mandate as well. We're seeing that the courts now are beginning to be more willing to intervene, to step in and essentially rule against certain mandates. But I want to go back to what happened in this particular case, because it said that this mandate was implemented without consulting the New York legislature. This type of executive fiat was something that became all too prevalent at the height of the pandemic. And it was because they were doing everything within their power to attempt to flex their muscle in an attempt to essentially gain emergency powers. And it's like the old adage goes that they never allow a good emergency to go to waste, because they view that as something that they can utilize to expand their power, impermissible though it may be, because that is the golden opportunity of a lifetime that they've been waiting for. And they figured that they could use the irrational fear that many people were feeling, particularly because of the way that the legacy media had basically widened the gulf here, going out on a limb, making this appear to be just a henny penny the sky is falling situation. And so it resulted in people being more willing to allow these sorts of governmental incursions and intrusions. But that said, ever since the arrival of the Omicron variant and seeing that the numbers never really wound up being quite as bad as they said they would be, all of a sudden, the justification that they had and the willingness of the other branches of government to simply go along to get along with these attempts to impermissibly expand the scope and breadth of their governmental power and authority, it was finally coming to an end. But the other interesting aspect of it all, particularly with Judge Radcliffe, I believe it was. I know I just had his name. Yes, Raidmaker, rather. What an interesting name. But anyway, the other interesting attribute to all of this was how they kept saying that they were sure that everybody was doing what they could to make this end as rapidly as possible. It was showing that they still want to show deference to one another. They still want to attempt to act as though the draconian measures that have been incrementally implementing and then sometimes implemented in sweeping fashion were necessary and ultimately a good thing. But at the same time, they were giving credence to the fact that there are ever growing numbers of citizens who are simply fed up with this. How long are we going to allow this litany of government gone wild to essentially strip, deprive, abridge, and alienate us from our ability to make a living, from our ability to live a normal life, from our ability to return to the way things ought to be in the land of the free and the home of the brave? These are important questions that need to be asked, and they are questions that have been asked, but it's just been as though they've been running wild. And one of the things that they really focused on here is that the rule had read in part, the rule that was in question here. There can be no question that every person in this state wishes, wants, and prays that this era of coofdom ends soon, and they will surely do their part to see this accomplished. Now, here's the crux. However, enacting any laws to this end is entrusted to the state legislature. That's where it comes in, folks. Even at the state level, we still have a division of powers in government. We need to have divisions in power, thereby in order to ensure that tyranny is not allowed to reign supreme. Unfortunately, tyranny has become all too common, and we certainly saw that that was the case with the prior Governor Andrew Cuomo. Now, of course, Andrew Cuomo got to playing a little bit of grab ass, and that's what got him in trouble. And I love how he always attempted to fall back on the excuse of, hey, forget about it. I touch these people all the time because I'm Italian. What the hell is that? I mean, I'm glad to see that he's gone. But at the same time, we see that the failed policies that he implemented were essentially doubled down upon by the new governor that replaced him, Governor Hochul. Because we know that Governor Andrew Cuomo enacted emergency powers all the way back in March of 2021. Or not in March of 2021, I'm sorry here. He did it very early on, but it was in March of 2021 that the emergency powers were curbed by the state legislature in Albany, and would apply to future governors. It rescinded the power of Executive Law 29A and prevented the type of mandates and directives which former Governor Cuomo included in his various COVID-19 related executive orders. Now, folks, why that's important is because it shows that when you recall, at the very early stages of the pandemic, Cuomo was going out in front of the cameras of the legacy media on a per diem basis, was attempting to write a book, and was attempting to make money off of this. And if you really want to know what it is that has motivated these charlatans who have gone out of their way to attempt to double down on this Coofterianism, it's that they wanted to essentially implement a Ponzi scheme. It was a get-rich-quick scheme. It was a scheme designed to strip, deprive, abridge, and alienate the average, ordinary, red-blooded citizen of their rights, liberties, and privileges and immunities in order to enrich themselves and to essentially make rules for thee, but not for me. And this has been a constant and repetitive pattern on the part of the left. But what we're seeing with the courts here, with the courts becoming more ready, willing, and able to essentially stand up to these extra-constitutional initiatives, endeavors, and efforts by governors, is going to become more common. This is particularly true because we've seen that each progressive variant of the virus has been getting weaker, which is evolutionarily something that makes sense. And eventually these viruses tend to have a tendency to burn themselves out as they expand further and further along. Historically speaking, we saw this with the Spanish influenza epidemic of 1918. We saw it with the SARS-1 pandemic. We even saw it with the swine flu. Now, these types of things happen because of biology. And I know the left is always among the first to go out there and to squeal the loudest about trust the science, yet when it really comes down to this, they ignore it. But the courts, at the same time, are going to become more willing to stand up to these types of things and to ultimately swing the entire trajectory of it all into full reverse because they recognize that the constituency, the true arbiters of popular sovereignty here in the land of the free and the home of the brave, aren't going to put up with this forever. In fact, the strains and fissures and cracks are already apparent. They are apparent and they are on full display for everyone to see. Yet, despite this, the left will continue to fight back. In fact, Governor Hochul says that they strongly condemn and disagree with the decision that was handed down by Judge Raidmaker of Nassau County. But at the same time that they are going to push for this, because they are afraid that they will lose the power which was ill-begotten, that they amassed illicitly upon themselves at the height of the pandemic, they feel that they have to do this to remain relevant. Yet I think it's going to wind up being tantamount to political suicide for them. We've already seen that the various responses that the government has taken has only led to increased unpopularity for the party in power now, which is the party that implemented these things and ran on continuing draconian efforts at locking down and at draconian efforts of enforcing a particular point. That, in conjunction with the type of censorship we've seen, with the types of fact-checking that we've seen in the various annals of social media, it is leading to an increased sense of frustration with it. And that I don't foresee changing at any point within the foreseeable future. The simple truth is these efforts are losing steam, and rightly so. There is only so far that you can push the American people. There is only so far that they will be willing to tolerate this sort of nonsense. And I think we've already seen it essentially reach wit's end. And so these court decisions that have essentially gone in the direction of those who are wanting for a return to normality, as opposed to the governments that don't wish this, it's going to become more common. And I think that eventually, should the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists continue to double down on these efforts as they have been, as Governor Hochul has been in this case, it's only going to backfire on them. Because it's going to encourage the courts to say, look, we've already ruled on this, and you are not heeding the rulings we have made. And therefore, you are operating outside of your constitutional confines and authority. Again, ladies and gentlemen, there is a way that we can influence this. And I know I'm sounding like a broken record with respect to this, but it literally does boil down to this. We have to be involved in the looming midterm elections so that we send an undeniable message to them that their attempts to strip, deprive, alienate, and abridge us of our fundamental and inalienable rights, our privileges and immunities, and our liberties as well, will not be tolerated. With that said, I want to thank you again for choosing to fly over the friendly airwaves with us here at the Wright Flyer. I hope to see you again next time when we venture out over the friendly airwaves. Please do take care. See you around.